Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to the September 21st, 2014 edition of Nightcast. While wildfires rage out of control in California, firefighters in Russia are trying to contain a fire that has engulfed a residential building. That's our opening story for tonight. And, friends, what's happening there in this Russian city of Krasnoyarsk? According to Russian media, more than 100 vehicles and a helicopter, along with over 100 firefighters, have been involved in the operation. All of the building's residents, 115 people, fled the building, and no injuries have been reported. The cause of this fire, again in Russia, in the Russian city of Krasnoyarsk, is the cause of this fire is as yet unknown. And friends, mentioning this fire from some unknown reason, and fires like that going on presently in California, the wildfire that's going on there in California, and just other things that have shown a lot of upset weather conditions, of all kinds, floodings, hurricanes, Arizona getting some fallout from the hurricane that killed a lot of people, did a lot of damage last week in Mexico. I wanted to just cover a few scriptures from the Bible that talk about, let's see if you can see this. I typed this up real quickly just before showtime. Let me get that out of the way. God controls the weather. Here are a few scriptures that relate to that. I'll put Exodus 9, verse 29 on the screen in just a moment. Psalm 135, 6 and 7, Jeremiah 10, 13. You may want to write some of these down. I'm only going to show one or two scriptures, but I just listed some here for you that shows how God controls the weather, the skies and the rain. Psalm 77, 16 through 19. The wind, he mentions his control over that in Mark 4, verses 35 through 41. Jeremiah 51, verse 16. Hebrews 1, verse 3 talks about how God sustains the universe. Job 37, verses 11, 12, and 16 show how God has power over the clouds, over the lightnings in Psalm 18:14, and over nature, overall, as mentioned in Job 26. Now, God has allowed Satan, as the God of this world, to have some power under God's control over the weather. You can see that in an example of that beginning in Job 1, starting at verse 13 and reading forward from there a little bit. This next script, I will read one of those to you, though, I promised. Bring Exodus chapter 9, verse 29 on the screen, and where it shows that Moses stretched out his hands unto the Eternal, and the thunder ceased, as he told Pharaoh it would do. And the hail, he was able to stop the hail. So through God's servants, God has allowed his servants to exercise control over the weather. A couple of his servants upcoming in the future, his two witnesses, will be able to bring fire either out of their mouths or down from the sky, one or the other. And they'll have control over the plagues of Egypt, which included a lot of weather conditions and activities and things. And that verse we just read from Exodus 9:29, and Moses said unto Pharaoh, as soon as I'm gone out of the city, I'll spread my hands unto the Lord. The Pharaoh had just asked Moses to stop that bad weather, and he had let all the children of Israel go. And Moses said, as soon as I'm gone out of the city, I'll spread abroad my hands unto the Eternal, the Lord God, and the thunder shall cease, neither shall there be any more hail, that you may know how that the earth is the Lord's. And I wanted to mention that one because I printed up this scripture from Isaiah 66 and verse 1, where it says that the earth is God's footstool and the heaven is his throne. Here in this verse, in Isaiah 66, verse 1. And, all right, just a few scriptures early on in the program here tonight, friends, and we'll go to our next story overseas in Europe, around near the Middle East. Some 66,000 people have, and of course this relates to this story on the second seal, the red horse of war and rumors of war. Some 66,000 people have crossed from Syria into Turkey since parts of the border were opened on Friday, according to a Turkish government official. The exodus has been triggered by fighting in northern Syria between Islamic State militants and Kurdish forces. Rami Ruhayem reports from Surak on the border between the two countries.
I'm here on the Turkish side of the border with Syria, and it's quite quickly becoming the Turkish border with the Islamic State. The villagers who managed to cross over from inside Syria say that this village, which is their village, is now under the control of Islamic State fighters. They say they've been trying to get their cattle across the line as well, but that the Turkish army has stopped them from doing so. Beyond the cattle you can see a railroad, and they say anybody who crosses that railroad risks being executed by Islamic State fighters. And they also say that the land here is full of mines and that many of the cattle have been injured. What we also have been hearing is that inside the village there have been a number of executions of people who did not manage to escape in time. We cannot verify, of course, anything that goes on in there. All of this is off limits to the media.
Okay, and then, friends, more related to the second seal of war and rumors of war. Brother Reuben, over in the modern-day people of France, are sending out their French fighter jets. They've launched their first airstrikes against Islamic State in northern Iraq. It follows President Hollande's promise to join the American-led efforts to confront the jihadists who have taken over a swath of Iraqi territory, or swath. IS fighters are also in control in many parts of Syria. On Friday, hundreds of Kurds living in the north of Syria fled their villages after an IS attack and crossed into Turkey. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
So France has joined the United States in carrying the fight against Islamic State. The French military released these pictures after two Rafale fighters operating out of the French base in Abu Dhabi hit and destroyed what was described as an IS logistics base near Mosul. President Hollande said it was just a beginning. More strikes against targets in Iraq will follow in the coming days.
Further missions will take place in the days to come, with the same goal: to weaken this terrorist organization and to support the Iraqi authorities, Iraqi soldiers and Kurdish fighters. There will be no French troops on the ground.
The French and American action is to relieve pressure on the Iraqi government and on the Kurdish autonomous zone in the north.
Thank you very much.
The US Secretary of State John Kerry said the coalition to fight Islamic State could be widened even further.
It must be comprehensive and include close collaboration across multiple lines of effort. It's about taking out an entire network, decimating and discrediting a militant cult masquerading as a religious movement. The fact is, there is a role for nearly every country in the world to play, including Iran.
Further west, along the Turkish border in Syria, Kurds are also suffering from the advance of Islamic State forces. Thousands of refugees have fled to the border after their villages were taken by the jihadists. Initially, Turkish troops were told not to let the refugees across. Instead, they allowed relatives to throw what help they could. But later, a change in orders and the border opened. There were harrowing stories.
Our house was destroyed. We have no family, no property left. We have nothing now. Everything is gone.
Turkey is already home to some 850,000 registered Syrian refugees. These people are now safe. But the jihadists want to wipe out resistance from what has till now been a small Kurdish enclave along the Turkish border. The pressure to escape is likely to grow. Hugh Schofield, BBC News, Paris.
Okay, friends, you heard the President of France, modern-day Reuben, say that he'd put no boots on the ground. So he's either mimicking the President of the United States or following in the same footsteps and the same shoes. Not the same boots, but the same shoes as the President of the United States. And the United States Secretary of State seems to have been given a little bit of coverage, maybe a little bit, saying that, how did he put that? About the Islamic State being, I forget his exact word now, but perhaps some of you remember. He said something to the effect like a phony religion, maybe trying to cover President Obama saying that the Islamic State is, they're not Islam. And then following that, the Prime Minister of the UK saying that Islam is a religion of peace. Excuse me, they're not reading the Quran. They're easily available, the Bible of the Islamic religion that the Islamic State militants prescribe to, and that very book that tells them to kill and murder infidels, anybody who's not a Muslim. A Muslim is one who practices the Islam religion. Islam is the religion. Muslim is a person who practices that religion, not necessarily any race. They don't have to necessarily be Arab to be a Muslim. You just have to be one who practices the Islamic religion, somewhat different from being a Jew. A true Jew is one who is born, whose mother has Jewish blood in her. And there are such things as Jewish proselytes, but they're not true Jews. They adapt the Jewish religion, but they're only a proselyte, not a true, real Jew of the tribe of Judah, who is one of 12 sons of Israel, whose name was Jacob before God changed it, who was the son of Isaac, who was the half-brother of Ishmael, who had all those descendants who became chiefs in the Arab world, who some are peaceful and some are giving Isaac's descendants a lot of trouble, head-rolling trouble. All right, let's go on with our next story. Our next story relates to the White Horse. A couple of stories tonight on the White Horse. Pope Francis has been holding private talks at the Vatican with Argentina's President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. This is the fourth time they've met since the Pope was elected last year. The two leaders are believed to have talked about the global economy and Argentina's spiraling debt. John McManus reports.
Times are tough at the moment for Argentina. The country's embroiled in a court fight with hedge fund creditors who are trying to prevent the government restructuring its debt at a potential loss to the creditors of more than $1 billion. So it's likely that Cristina Kirchner was seeking both practical as well as spiritual support when she met Pope Francis on Saturday at the Vatican. Beforehand, the Pontiff's chief of ceremonies, Guillermo Carcher, said that Francis was worried about the governability of Argentina. But after emerging from her meeting with the leader of the Catholic Church, President Kirchner said that, on the contrary, the Pope was worried about the world, but not Argentine democracy. It's the fourth meeting between the two leaders in a relationship that was troubled when Pope Francis was Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, but has since become much warmer. Pope Francis has warned that the current world economic system is unsustainable. And that message may be music to President Kirchner's ears as she prepares to plead her case at the United Nations in a few days' time. John McManus, BBC News.
Okay, friends, and one of the most important things, I think, related to the Pope and this piece of news for those who will be traveling to the Feast of Tabernacles in a couple of weeks. You know, we have a little respite on the news in a certain way because of this one story that came out a few days ago where the Vatican released information that Pope Francis is to speak before the European Parliament on November 25, just a couple of months from now. Today's the 21st, so a couple of months, a few days from now, 2 months from the 25th. Again, the Pope will be speaking before the European Parliament. Now, that could wind up that'll be interesting news to follow because, you know, we are watching things related to the seals of Revelation, 4 of those seals being now very, very active. The 4 seals that represent what's been called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, apocalypse simply being the Greek word for revelation. So we got these 4 horses, 4 different colors: the white horse of religion, religious deception, the red horse of war and rumors of war and world war, the 3rd seal, the black horse of famine, scarcity of food, and the 4th seal, the pale horse, who has a rider named Death, alongside whom rides Hades, hell, the grave. A big picture of death from that seal, and it comes via 3 different elements: via loimus, disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. Also, between the 3rd seal and the 5th seal, Jesus Christ said we would have seismus, seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, hurricanes, tornadoes, any commotion in the air and commotions on the ground, such as earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfires, flooding, starts in the air but winds up on the ground. Any seismic conditions, and many of those wind up killing a number of people. And then Christ said between the 3rd and 5th seal there would be not the mega trouble of the 5th seal, but trouble that leads to that trouble, as he explained it in Mark 13, verse 8, with the Greek word tarike, meaning disturbances, troubled waters, both literally and figuratively, mobs, seditions in the figurative sense, and just general overall disturbances and trouble. Then, now these 4 seals and all of those things I just mentioned are very active in the news now. We can see that it could easily transition on over into the 5th seal soon. Very easily make that transition. The prelude music for the 5th seal is playing now. The 5th seal being, as Mr. Armstrong put it at one time in a sermon we played over the weekend, he mentioned decades and decades, a couple of decades before he died, he was mentioning that the 3rd and 4th seal would be the next things to be watching for in prophecy. Well, those things are happening rampantly now. In just a few years, 2 or 3 years before he died, he said that the next major event in prophecy would be the coming of the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation, a time of World War III, a time of the revival of the Holy Roman Empire under a 7th and final head, with the Pope holding a coronation ceremony in Frankfurt, Germany, and I'm basing that on the fact that that's where they've always held them in the last hundreds of years in Frankfurt, Germany, in the Emperor's Hall. And though that hall was bombed, as I've mentioned several times here, it was bombed toward the end of World War II, thanks to the good old tax-paying people of the United States and the Marshall Plan. That building was rebuilt according to the architectural design of the building with new material. And all of the statues and portraits that were in that building of all the emperors who ruled over Germany and the Holy Roman Empire and France, and all those have been put back in that building, and that building is sitting there brand new, ready for the coronation ceremony of the seventh and final head of the Holy Roman Empire, part of the fifth seal with the Great Tribulation, a time of a great martyrdom of God's saints, those who are left behind as part of the true church of God, a remnant of the true church of God, who are not accounted worthy to escape, as is the Philadelphia church, but a people who are the true people of God nonetheless, who keep His commandments and who were just a little bit lukewarm, but God will come to them and say, look, hang in there. Use the guts I did to go through the martyrdom of crucifixion, and you'll sup with me at my marriage supper and become part of the bride of Jesus Christ. What else happens in that third seal? 2 witnesses will be roaming the earth, giving their witness and using the power of the plagues of Egypt against their enemies. And we mentioned it'll be the revival of the Holy Roman Empire, be the round 3 of World War, be the time of Jacob's trouble, a time so bad that, as Jesus Christ put it in Matthew 24, He said it's a time that's so bad that nothing's been as bad as what's coming since the beginning of the world. And He said, no, nor ever shall be. Let's just take a quick look at that verse, Matthew 24, and it'd be verse 20, 21, 22, somewhere right in there. Starting in verse 20, Christ says, but pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For, verse 21, then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. So it's a time so bad, nothing before it's ever been as bad, and nothing after it again will ever be as bad again. And verse 22, and except those days should be cut short, shortened, it would be the annihilation of all mankind. No flesh should be saved alive, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be cut short. And that's the next thing we can expect to be seeing. And friends, there's a little bit of a timing element here with what's about to happen with the Pope about to travel over to speak before the European Parliament on November 25. That in a way that says, look, we have a little bit of breathing space here. Go enjoy your Feast of Tabernacles and get back, and we'll be watching what happens with that event. Will that bring things together for the bringing together of the seventh head of the Holy Roman Empire? Will that speed it up? Will that have a lot to do with it or a little to do with it? We'll have to be watching and see. But we know we got these couple of months that we can kind of breathe, and not have to stretch it so hard. I got 1 or 2 more stories to go here. Well, let's just close with this one story here, friends. There have been worldwide demonstrations ahead of a UN meeting in New York on how to reduce global carbon emissions. It's attracted hundreds of thousands of people, the organizers say. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon attended the rally ahead of a meeting which will see world leaders discuss climate change. And I'm going to put this one up under the guise of disturbances and trouble. Around 2,000 protest marches have taken place in cities around the world demanding greater action on climate change. Laura Westbrook reports.
a global call to action. Tens of thousands took to the streets here in New York, demanding to be heard.
The message here is to get the word out that climate change is real, science backs it up, and it's something that we need to do something about it very quickly.
World leaders are due to meet here at a UN summit next week, and many hope their show of support on the streets will produce real change in the boardrooms and a new global climate treaty by the end of next year.
Climate change is a defining issue of our time, and there is no time to lose. If we do not take action now, we will have to pay much more.
But it's not just here in New York. There were similar marches in Melbourne, Rio de Janeiro.
And friends, you know, the Secretary General of the UN says, well, we need to take action now and things like that. But, you know, it's interesting. You remember those scriptures I read you at the beginning of the program about how God is in control of the weather. And one of the scriptures I go over often, or some of the scriptures I go over often, from a couple of chapters from Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28. There are other scriptures that say basically the same thing. And that is that if we obey our Creator, He gives us blessings, including blessings over the weather. Again, reminder, go back to the beginning of the program, I showed you scriptures that show you that God is in charge of the weather, in control of the weather. And in Leviticus 26, also in Deuteronomy 28, He starts out saying that if you will obey me, let me just see which one of those mentions the weather in the beginning. Right after he says it. He's reminding us to walk in His statutes, and then when we get to verse 14, he says, "But if you won't," well, let's see. I want to go the other way. I want to say, tell you what He'll do if we do keep them. Verse 3, he says, "If you will keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary." Verse 2, "I am the eternal." Verse 3, "If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then," here's another scripture that tells you God controls the weather, "then I will give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. And your threshing shall reach unto the vintage, and the vintage shall reach unto the sowing time. And you shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land safely." The Leviticus 26 starts out by saying, if you obey your Creator, you don't have to worry about climate change. You don't have to spend all kind of gobs of money and hold all kind of demonstrations and protests. That energy should be spent in saying, let's obey our Creator. That'd make a huge, huge difference. Friends, that's it for tonight, this Sunday night report here on Nightcast. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow evening, Monday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.